New Zealand's Wellington is a pretty interesting example of transport downshifting. Having a fairly developed trolleybus network which has been in operation for almost 70 years, the city closed it completely and replaced with the diesel buses. And it happened quite recently in 2017. I was especially surprised by this because I have always considered New Zealand to be a super-duper eco-friendly country that cares about the environment. And then suddenly this. So it was very interesting to me to discover how it happened. Wellington is the capital of New Zealand. It is located right here and its population is about 215,000 people. They launched a trolleybus in 1949 and it was supposed to gradually replace the tram, which at the time was considered as outdated form of public transportation, while at the same time trolleybus was perceived as more modern and flexible. Another big benefit of the trolleybuses and an advantage over diesel buses was their good traction on hills, which was very useful for such a hilly city as Wellington. The trolleybus network gradually grew, while the trams at the same time were shrinking and were finally closed at 1964. Development of the Wellington trolleybus reached its peak in 1980s when the network grew up to 9 routes and 50 kilometers of total length. But there was only decline ahead. In 1992, the city council decided that it was time to stop spending money on the trolleybus and sold it to a private company, Stagecoach, from Perth. And this is not the Perth from Australia, but the one in Scotland. According to the agreement, the private company had to operate the trolleybus traffic and maintain the infrastructure, which at the same time remained in the city's property. Right at this time, the trolleybus fleet began to be updated with the new trolleybuses. They were more spacious than the previous models, had a low floor, and could even travel small distances without a contact network due to the batteries. And compared to what have been operating on the routes before, this was a huge progress. The first test unit, named Design Line, arrived to the city in 2003. And then, between 2007 and 2009, Wellington received a full batch of 57 new trolleybuses built on the Volvo components. To save money, some parts of the old Wellington trolleybuses, such as electric motors, were also used in their production, although they were completely refurbished. But looks like this upgrade was not easy for the British operator, which had to resell the rights to operate Wellington trolleybuses in 2005 to pay off its debts. The new owner, having paid $171 million, was the New Zealand investment company Infratil Limited. They rebranded the trolleybuses and put them on the streets in a new yellow and black livery under the brand name Go Wellington. However, private companies constantly saved money on infrastructure maintenance, which caused its condition to degrade, and trolleybus traffic became slow and very unreliable. And because of this, there were permanent discussions about closing the trolleybus operation in the city. In 2014, the city council released a draft of a new urban mobility plan, which proposed to eliminate trolleybuses in 2017 and switch to buses. The reasons given were that the trolleybuses themselves were outdated and the infrastructure required expensive maintenance and upgrades costing about $50 million. For example, Chris Laidlaw, chairman of the Greater Wellington Regional Council, wrote in his article that the power cables that fed the trolleybus contact wires were used even by a tram that was closed in the 1960s, so they are in a very poor technical condition. Wait, what? So you haven't repaired the infrastructure at all for 60 years and then you suddenly go, oh, it doesn't work well for some reason. Isn't it strange? Another argument of the city was that it was difficult to change routes because of the tie-in to the overhead wires. Officials said the trolleybus system doesn't have the needed flexibility. You know, I always get a chuckle out of this argument. What kind of flexibility do you need? This is public transportation, not a taxi that has to follow every passenger. Its routes shouldn't change every day. Community members responded by reminding that all the trolleybuses were built in 2007-2009, meaning that they were only 5 to 7 years old when the plan was published. But this didn't change the city's vision. In the next version of the plan, they've just added a sentence that the trolleybuses had no more than 10 years left to work, so let's just throw them away. And unfortunately, this is a quite typical behavior of officials who have made up their minds long ago and then are just looking for convenient arguments. A small hope for saving the Wellington trolleybus appeared after the 2017 parliamentary elections. The ruling coalition with the Labour Party included the Green Party and the New Zealand First, both of which officially stated that they wanted to modernize and maintain the trolleybus service in Wellington. But in the end, the new Minister of Transport, Phil Twyford, said that the government wouldn't step in to save the network. On October 31, 2017, the trolleybuses rolled out on the streets of Wellington for the last time, and after that the network was turned off and gradually dismantled during a year. And instead of trolleybuses, the routes were taken over by regular diesel buses, some of which had to be borrowed from Auckland because there were not enough buses in Wellington itself. So environmentally friendly transport was replaced by one that pollutes the air with various emissions. And this is despite the fact that New Zealand has programs aimed at reducing CO2 and other air pollution. Institutional failure. At the same time, the City Council officially announced that it was strategically planning to switch to battery buses as soon as possible, although at that time they were just beginning to gain popularity in the world and their technology was far from perfect. But as of 2022, 5 years after the trolleybuses were shut down, there were only 80 electric buses and about 400 diesel buses in Wellington. A year later, there were 94 electric buses. So the pace of replacing diesel buses with electric ones was not as fast as planned, and in fact, one electric vehicles were just replaced by another ones, while diesel buses remained. The main positive thing is that all the buses now have to meet Euro 5 requirements. By the way, the level of emissions from transport in the city decreased exactly after the replacement of old buses with the newer ones, but not after the trolleybuses were shut down. There were also attempts to convert existing diesel buses into battery electric buses, but this idea was rejected because such conversion turned out to be, as they said, phenomenally expensive. It was even more expensive than buying a new electric bus. Now the city plans to have all the public transportation with zero emissions by 2035. The retired trolleybuses were left standing in the old depot. There was no one to sell them to, as Wellington was the last big left-handed trolleybus system in the world. So now decommissioned trolleybuses are slowly being sold off to be converted into tiny houses. It's sad, so sad. It's a sad, sad situation. Is this the cyberpunk that we deserve? The history of Wellington trolleybus is perhaps one of the most controversial urban decisions of recent times. Or rather, not even one decision, but a whole chain of bad decisions. In general, there have been enough examples in the world when cities closed their trolleybus or tram systems. But it was either a long time ago, when everyone was trying to do everything for the convenience of cars, or because of poverty, when cities just didn't have the money to maintain the infrastructure. But this is obviously not the case here. New Zealand is a developed and rich country, and also the global trolleybus destruction party ended 40 years ago, and now cities are more likely to create new systems than to close existing ones. So the question is mostly about the understanding of city authorities who pushed through this decision and seem to ignore the residents' opinion. When I read articles on this topic and the arguments of officials, I was under the impression that they didn't make a decision based on facts, but rather selected facts for a decision that had already been made a long time ago. Of course, the result was also affected by the fact that the city's infrastructure hasn't been repaired for years. It is not surprising that with this approach it wore out and became very unreliable. But to see this situation in such a prosperous country like New Zealand is really surprising. Over the past 60 years, all these power cables could have been replaced gradually, at least 1 kilometer per year, and the situation would not have been so critical. It seems that by giving the trolleybuses to private hands, the city wanted to stop spending money on them from the budget and have a private company to do it instead. But the private company, in order to make any profit from this, had to save money on infrastructure maintenance, which finally killed the system. And that's sad, because with a working infrastructure, trolleybuses could be equipped with bigger batteries for autonomous operation, which would give the flexibility that transport officials were talking about, and then gradually replace replace them with the newer ones and supplement them with electric buses that can be charged in motion from trolleybus wires. As for me, this would be much better. And there are plenty of examples around the world where cities have done just that, some of which I've talked about in this video. And the financial model of public transport would also have to be completely different. Trying to make it self-sufficient always ends with a failure because high-quality public transport is in general an expensive thing. And if you try to cover all the costs of its operation through tickets alone, they will be too expensive for passengers. But public transportation is still needed because without it, cities will sink in traffic jams and the quality of life will significantly decrease. In fact, public transport is not a business, but a tool for healthy functioning of the city, and that's why it is beneficial for cities to finance it. At the same time, a private company can be a public transport operator, it's not a problem, but the financing should come from the city on the basis of payment for a transportation work. In this case, the transportation operator receives money not from each individual passenger, but for each kilometer traveled by each transport unit according to previously signed contract. And the price of this kilometer should be high enough so that the carrier can maintain both the transport and the entire infrastructure. Part of these funds will come from ticket sales, and the rest will be subsidized from the city budget. And this model works in many cities around the world where public transport is really high quality and well developed. That's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, leave your comments, share it and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support the progress of this channel, you can do it on Patreon. See you in the next videos.